For more than a decade, China sold the world a promise made of steel, concrete, and speed. New ports, new railways, new power grids, new highways crossing deserts, mountains, jungles, and coastlines. And for a while, it looked unstoppable. But now, many of the countries that borrowed for that dream are paying China back at record levels. In 2025, developing countries were expected to send about $35 billion in debt service to China, with the poorest and most vulnerable countries carrying roughly $22 billion of that burden. Aid data also says about 80% of China's overseas lending portfolio in the developing world is now tied to countries in financial distress. The question is no longer whether Beijing can build. It is whether the system it built can survive the bill. That is why this story matters far beyond China. The Belt and Road was never just an infrastructure program. It was a map of power, a way to reshape trade routes, lock in supply chains, secure influence over ports and corridors, deepen political ties, and place Chinese capital, contractors, and standards across more than 150 countries. If it worked, it could cut shipment times, lower trade costs, and redraw the global economy. The World Bank estimated that full belt and road transport projects could reduce shipment times and meaningfully lower trade costs, with even one day less in transit capable of lifting trade by more than 5%. And this is where the story becomes more complicated than the headline. If you look only at the surface, the Belt and Road does not look dead. Research from the Green Finance and Development Center said Chinese Belt and Road engagement reached about $121.8 billion in 2024, and even rose further in 2025. Colombia signed a Belt and Road Cooperation Plan with China in May 2025. Nepal, after years of delay, finally signed a working framework with Beijing in December 2024. Xi Jinping also pledged nearly $51 billion in new support for Africa in September 2024. But underneath those headline numbers, the original Belt and Road model is under severe pressure. The early version ran on giant sovereign loans, grand political announcements, and billion-dollar mega projects that assumed growth would come quickly enough to justify the debt. That model is shrinking. In Africa, Chinese lending fell to just $2.1 billion in 2024, less than a tenth of its 2016 peak, according to Boston University data. Reuters described the shift clearly. China is moving away from the old style of debt-funded railways and highways and toward smaller, more selective, more commercially viable projects. Even Xi's own message at the 2023 Belt and Road Forum was that the initiative would become smaller and greener. To understand why that matters, you have to go back to the beginning, before any ribbon cutting, before any locomotives, before any container ships. A Belt and Road project starts on paper. Governments and Chinese lenders study freight volumes, energy demand, shipping times, mineral exports, passenger numbers, and political risk. Engineers run topographic surveys. Geotechnical teams drill boreholes to see whether the ground can hold bridge piers, tunnel linings, or port cranes. Hydrological studies ask what happens in flood season. Environmental and social assessments examine fisheries, forests, farmland, neighborhoods, and indigenous land. Route planners compare shorter alignments against safer ones. Lawyers handle permits, sovereign guarantees, and land acquisition. Bankers test whether the numbers still work if traffic comes in below forecast. On a good project, this phase saves billions. On a bad one, mistakes made here become permanent. And the record shows how often that early-stage discipline broke down. Aid data found that the number of Chinese grant and loan-financed infrastructure projects in the developing world with significant environmental, social, or governance risk exposure climbed to 1,693 projects worth about $470 billion by 2021.
The plans call for the main support right here. Make sure the alignment is perfect.
It also counted 94 suspensions and cancellations worth $56 billion across 49 countries. Those are not just accounting problems. They are warning signs that somewhere between the feasibility study and the field office, politics outran engineering.
Bring it in slow, watch your spacing on the grader. We're clear on this side.
And ambition outran the economics. When a Belt and Road project does move from planning to execution.
Did you see the schedule for today? We are on the north side.
Okay, let's grab the gear first. It's gonna be a long day.
That is when the dream becomes physical. First comes clearing and securing the site. Hillsides are cut back.
Watch the clearance on the crane swing.
Roger that. Securing this load now.
Temporary roads are pushed through. Fencing goes up. Worker camps appear. Diesel generators hum to life.
Keep the alignment steady. We need another 5 feet up on the boom. Okay, hold it right there. Stop, stop, perfect. Check the slump on truck 3. Looks good, maintaining mixed speed.
Site offices, concrete yards, warehouses, fuel depots, maintenance sheds, and logistics zones are laid out like small industrial towns. Then the heavy machinery arrives. Excavators, piling rigs, crawler cranes, dump trucks, concrete batching plants, dredgers
Watch
for
the
marine
load, bring
works,
it down
and
easy.
in mountain rail
We need those
projects,
parts moved now.
tunnel boring equipment or blasting
Copy
teams.
that, moving the cement
Supply
next.
chains have to be built before the project itself can be built. Steel, cement, aggregates, fuel, spare parts, and skilled labor all have to reach remote terrain on time. Only then does a ceremonial groundbreaking become real construction. You can see that physical scale in the projects that still symbolize the Belt and Road at its boldest. In Peru, China opened the deep-water port of Chansay in November 2024, a $1.3 billion investment built to create a new Pacific trade gateway. In Malaysia, the China-linked East Coast Rail Link was reported to be 60% complete in March 2024 and aimed for completion by the end of 2026. In Laos, a $6 billion railway linking Kunming to Vientiane opened in 2021 as a flagship overland corridor. These are not small works. They are ports with deep berths, railways that need embankments, viaducts, signaling, substations, drainage, and rolling stock, and corridors that have to connect not just one job site, but whole national systems. And that is where the engineering challenge becomes brutal.
The alignment is critical here. Hold position.
We're losing light. Make sure the welds are secure.
A port is not just a quay wall, it needs dredging, breakwater protection, turning basins, yard paving strong enough for container stacks, cranes that can survive salt corrosion, customs systems, truck gates, and hinterland connections. A railway is not just a track. It needs land formation, culverts, bridges, tunnels, ballast, sleepers, power, communications, signaling, fencing, and constant quality control over thousands of separate tasks. One mistake in ground conditions, one unstable slope, one weak forecast of cargo demand, and the entire financial logic starts to crack. The political stakes were always just as large as the engineering ones. For Beijing, the Belt and Road was a way to export industrial capacity, keep Chinese state firms busy, secure access to resources, and expand influence across the global south. For partner governments, it offered something Western lenders often did not: speed, scale, and a willingness to finance hard infrastructure. For local elites, it meant prestige. For contractors, it meant years of work. For port cities and border regions, it held out the promise of logistics booms, industrial parks, and jobs. That is why countries kept joining even as criticism mounted. Italy left the pact in 2023 and Panama moved to exit in 2025, but others still signed on. Then reality arrived. Kenya's standard gauge railway became one of the clearest signs that the old Belt and Road machine was losing momentum. The extension toward Uganda stalled for 6 years after Chinese funding dried up, leaving the line more than 350 kilometers short of the border. It only restarted in March 2026 under a different model, using securitized local revenue and more risk sharing instead of the old straightforward Chinese sovereign loan approach. That is not business as usual. That is a financing system being rebuilt because the old one stopped working. Pakistan tells a similar story from the energy side. In July 2024, Islamabad said it had started talks to reprofile Chinese power sector debt project by project. Sri Lanka, after defaulting, signed agreements in June 2024 to restructure about $10 billion in bilateral debt, including $4.2 billion owed to China Exim Bank. In Laos, Chinese-backed hydropower and a China-built railway have contributed to severe debt strain, and a Power China unit sued Laos's state utility in 2025 over unpaid dues, equivalent to roughly 4% of the country's GDP. These are not isolated inconveniences. They are the aftershocks of building mega-projects faster than fragile economies could absorb them. Some projects were not even failing after completion. They were struggling before they truly began. Nepal signed up to the Belt and Road in 2017, but Reuters reported that no projects have been planned or started for 7 years before a framework agreement was finally reached in 2024. Pokhara International Airport, built with a $216 million Chinese loan and promoted by Beijing as a Belt and Road success, has faced operational problems and too few international flights. The lesson is brutal. Finishing concrete is not the same as finishing a working transport system. That distinction matters at the end of every mega project. Testing, commissioning, and handover are where political spectacle meets engineering truth. Port berths have to be load-tested, rail systems have to run signaling trials, power connections have to synchronize safely, inspections, certifications, customs procedures, operator training, and final punch list repairs all come after the celebratory speeches. Chansey could open as a symbol. A railway can start service as a symbol. But a symbol only becomes a successful asset if the ships keep coming, the trains run full, the maintenance budgets are real, and the surrounding economy actually uses the corridor. If the Belt and Road works in its strongest corridors, the upside is still enormous. Faster ports and railways can compress supply chains, cut shipping times, and pull inland regions into global trade. Malaysia's rail link could strengthen east-west connectivity across the peninsula. Chansey could give South America a new Pacific gateway tied more tightly to Asian trade. The World Bank has long argued that better corridors can raise trade, incomes, and even reduce poverty if governments also improve border management, transparency, and broader policy coordination. But if it fails, the damage lasts much longer than the construction boom. Debt service crowds out schools, hospitals, and basic infrastructure. Delayed restructurings freeze investment and poison politics. Underused airports, half-finished railways, and overpriced corridors become monuments to bad forecasting. Lowy now says China is shifting from the developing world's biggest bilateral banker to its chief debt collector. A-Data says Beijing is trying to future-proof the initiative, not abandon it. That may be true, but it also means the age of easy belt and road money is over, and the age of repayment, renegotiation, and selective survival has begun. So, is China's belt and road collapsing? Not in one dramatic explosion, not in a single bankruptcy, a single default, or a single abandoned port. It is collapsing in a slower, more dangerous way. The original model is breaking under the weight of debt, weak demand, political backlash, and the sheer difficulty of turning geopolitical ambition into profitable infrastructure. What survives will be narrower, tougher, greener in some places, more transactional in others, and far less forgiving than the version the world first saw in 2013. Because in the end, the Belt and Road was never really a test of whether China could build mega-projects. It was a test of whether the world could afford the future China was offering. And that test is happening now. One repayment, one stalled corridor, one renegotiated contract, and one unfinished promise at a time.